Hi, Bridget.
Hey, where'd Dave go? I was like, cliffhanger's over there somewhere.
I'm over here. I'm the noisy one.
You're the silent one enjoying the couches. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. This is really exciting. I'm excited to be in Toronto. This is actually my first visit to Toronto since 2002.
Ooh.
So it's still, yeah, well, you've done a lot of construction. It looks great. The CN Tower is still there. I didn't go up at this time. I figure, it probably is still it still has that glass floor that you stand on it or lie down on it and go, whew. But in any event, basically, I figured it would be kind of fun to bring a talk, and we'll see how this goes. This is a talk that I did at a few meetups with a coworker in Minneapolis and Philadelphia and New York back in December. And he did it once by himself in Columbus, Ohio, and said it wasn't as fun. But I'm pretty sure with your help we can make Toronto just as fun, as all those cities. If you have no idea who I am, my name is Bridget, and I work at Pivotal. I live in Minneapolis, which is colder than Toronto right now. It was really exciting to come to Canada for a warm vacation. I think, what did we see, honey? It was like negative 17 Celsius in Minneapolis last night.
Yes.
So, which the internet tells me is like one of those degrees that I actually understand and is cold. I co-host a podcast called Arrested DevOps, and if you haven't listened to it, it's pretty fun. I'm actually on some episodes from time to time when I'm not on the road and can schedule it. I am part of the shadowy cabal that brings you DevOps days. So if you are not from Toronto, perhaps our Ottawa folks, can we give it up for our first speakers? They were great. If you want to bring a DevOps Days to a different city, obviously DevOps Days Toronto, Steve, Eric, and company have it under control, and Philippe and everybody else. But
Don't say that.
but you totally do. But if you want to do a DevOps Days somewhere else, and that's of interest to you, talk to me, because it's actually pretty fun. I've been at Pivotal about 4 months. Before that, I was on call for production infrastructure, and I counted from 1999 to the middle of 2015. So at this point, it's kind of exciting to not be on call for anything whatsoever. I did trade that in for more travel, so I'm not sure that my sleep got a net benefit, but what with jet lag and what have you. But yeah, let's just cut to the chase. Let's go to what we all came to talk about, which is Docker, like that. It's actually kind of funny at DockerCon. They recognize the hype, so they have a talk track called Docker, which I think is fantastic. It's fun stuff. And so I'm just kind of curious, and this is not going to be as interactive a talk as the last one, sorry, but I'm curious, how many people here have played with Docker in some capacity? A bunch of people, yeah, about a third of the room, perhaps. And how many of it are actually using it in the workplace, maybe in a dev test environment? Some percentage of those, a reasonable percentage of those. How many people are actually running Docker in production? You're just keeping your hand up. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I don't know, Steve, how many people do we have here in the room?
I think we hit 100.
Yeah, close.
Maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, close to 100 people, maybe 7 of you running Docker in production. That's actually a pretty good percentage. So be proud of yourselves, Toronto. That's a better percentage than most cities. I'm thinking, Graham, you're just skewing the average here. Is that what's happening?
Well,
what?
Me and Steve.
Yeah.
I set it up for Graham.
Yeah, you're skewing the average.
Well, you tried, but...
Exactly. But the point is that everybody is here because they're either interested in DevOps, databases, Cloud Foundry, or perhaps Docker. And I think a lot of people are Docker curious, right? It's like everybody experiments with Docker in college, right? I mean, obviously. But there is this entire hype cycle. I think that we have to acknowledge it, and the folks at Docker certainly do. We have to acknowledge that there is this hype cycle. And I'm not sure Docker really where Docker is on this hype cycle. I mean, I feel like there was a lot of talk about containers last year. This year, a lot of people want to talk about the scheduling and orchestrating of same. I mean, for you, just shout it out. Like, where are you with your Docker experience right now?
Disillusionment.
Ooh, some people are starting to be disillusioned. That might mean you've actually used it. You've run into some of those device map or race conditions.
Isn't that called being like 6 weeks into a Docker adoption project, I believe?
Right.
Steve, about right? Yeah.
Right.
That's where it is.
Right, exactly. And I think that so I want to kind of step back and give it a little bit of perspective. Because this whole containerization thing is not actually new, like at all. It's probably older than some people in this room. Like it's literally been in a Unix kernel longer than some people in this room. Not in the Linux kernel, but it has containers in some form or another have been present in Unix for a long time. Actually, the date on there, like when Chirrut got added to BSD, Bill Joy did it. He can't explain why or what the thought process was at the time. So much, would be known about history if we had Git blame, like for the past, but we don't. So, I mean, I think Brian Cantrell from Joyent was speculating at Velocity New York that it might have had something to do with it being like BSD, LSD, the 80s, who knows what was going on there. But when you move from just the idea of a Chirrut file system into something like, I mean, who here has used FreeBSD or any of the BSDs with like a Chirrut jail? Or Solaris, like Solaris zones. And so you're sitting here thinking like, hey, this container hype, it's ridiculous because this isn't new. We've been doing this stuff for years.
Not even as good.
I'm sorry?
It's not even as good.
Well, and that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because we can have a lot of arguments about C groups and namespaces and user namespaces and who's doing containers right. And what did Docker do in 2013 that was so different from all of this? And what I would say that Docker did is, the genius of Docker is that they put, at the time it was LXC, so they put enough training wheels on LXC to make it accessible to an increasingly large number of people. And those of us in the room who have used, jails and zones are not everybody, and it's certainly not every developer. And so the idea of making tooling, APIs, to make parts of the Linux kernel that maybe did exist accessible to people, I think is really powerful. And then I got to give it to the folks at Docker because they did something else last summer that I thought was really powerful and enabled some of what we're doing with Docker and Cloud Foundry today, which is they said, hey, and I knew it was coming when Solomon Hykes put up a slide of a dove and an olive branch, and Alex Polvy's sitting in the front row from CoreOS, and I'm like, oh, they're going to resolve the Docker rocket fight. And they did. And it was, the one thing that made me sad about it is he didn't actually pull Polvy all the way up on the stage so I could do a decent, live tweeting picture of it. But he came down off the stage, shook his hand, and said, okay, we're going to go with the Open Container Initiative, all right? We're going to open source run C. They had since moved away from, they moved away from LXC, live container, it's like standardized on run C. They're like, we're open sourcing this, we're going to have a foundation run it, which I think is a really good move. And there's an entire talk that could be had about the politics of open source and why and when you get foundations involved and make sure that the open code is held in trust for the public. But I think suffice to say in this case, like when you have a company like Pivotal that contributes open source, we contribute about 60% of the engineering to open source Cloud Foundry. But other members of the Cloud Foundry Foundation, like IBM, HP, all sorts of folks, also contribute. But when you have a company like Docker saying, hey, this is important, the way that we have made this standard, the Docker file is a standard. I mean, Docker, it's been said, like Docker is like the PDF of the container world. There are a lot of ways to put a container together, like we just talked about, but Docker put it together in a way and then built APIs around it in a way that makes it feels really right. It feels like a standard. And so then everyone thinks, oh, we absolutely have to implement some Docker. And it's like, well, yes, you probably should have containers, and it's a good idea for you to use them in a standard image format. Now, how you want to orchestrate those containers, how you want to run them, how you want to build your tooling around them is a completely separate question. And I think that that's where a lot of people get confused and start looking at the giant shopping list And this is not going to be, I'm not going to pull out a slide with a giant matrix that tells you exactly when you should combine Kubernetes, Mesos, maybe some Cloud Foundry, because you can use that with Mesos. The Mesos people open source some stuff around that. I was really excited to see that. But like, I'm not going to pull out a giant decision tree for you, because the reality is, if someone tries to show you one of those, that's not true. It's not true because nobody understands your business needs, your organization's use cases the way you do. And so you're gonna have to be the people who, the technical people in your organization, which probably are you since you're at a DevOps meetup, are gonna have to make a lot of decisions around this space. And at this point it gets kind of complicated because you certainly can roll your own starting with Docker. I've done it. I've been at an organization, I was at a streaming video site called Drama Fever where we ran Docker in production. We started running Docker in production in October 2013. And I'm pretty sure the main thing on the Docker website was like, some link that said, under no circumstances should you run this in production. And we were like, that sounds like a great plan. But I think it's important to realize that there is a lot more to this picture than just the container. And like when we're looking at the history as well, we should kind of mention that both Bosch, which is the infrastructure automation layer that's used in Cloud Foundry, and the Cloud Foundry project itself have actually been around for years. So this isn't even new stuff. That is the old Cloud Foundry logo, which James Waters apparently got someone to make a 99 Designs. Since then, the foundation has done many good things, including come out with a new logo, which is, like actually looks like a Foundry, possibly. I thought it was water, but see, I'm from Minneapolis, so I think of water. My coworker Casey West, who's from Pittsburgh, Steel Town, he was like, oh, all right, pouring steel, Foundry. I was like, okay, design. But anyway, so part of the way that Cloud Foundry works is if you've ever used something like Heroku, then you've used containers even if you didn't realize it at the time, because they use containers with their build packs. And Cloud Foundry does work with Heroku style build packs. However, in recent versions of Cloud Foundry, it also works with a standard Docker image. So you can bring a build pack or a Docker image, or you can actually bring a .NET application and run it on the platform, which is kind of cool. And if you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, I'm at the Pivotal offices, she's wearing a Cloud Foundry t-shirt, did I come here for a sales pitch? No. I do not care if you write anyone a check, because I am in technical advocacy, I am not in sales. And I focus on the open source project, which means that everything I'm going to show you demo-wise is actually open source, and there's a GitHub repo that we're going to have a link to, so that you can try this all at home. Like this is try this at home. So you can actually try everything in there. If you do want to look at some people who, for example, some of your cousins to the south, which by the way, I've got to say, again, Team Ottawa, talk to your government city, because the UK and Australia and the US's Digital Innovation Branch of 18F are all using Cloud Foundry now. I think Australia is actually using Pivotal Cloud Foundry, UK and US are using open source. So, for their government platforms, I'm thinking Canada is definitely needs to be in this club.
Canada just posted a month-long maintenance page for the tax system. I'm not even joking.
Wow. All right, so a month-long maintenance page for the tax system.
We pay for that.
Is actually something that the US does too, which is really unfortunate. Like the IRS has really long maintenances, and I'm thinking, folks, go talk to your patriots at 18F. They'll help you out with this, right? Anyway, so the fine folks at 18F actually wrote what I thought was a really nice blog post, and there's a link to it. I was going to say in the show notes. I spend way too much time podcasting. There's a link to it in the slides that will be posted immediately after this meetup and tweeted on the hashtag on Twitter and added to Meetup, so you have all the access to all the stuff I'm showing you here. So you don't have to do the thing where you take a picture of the slide that has all the links and then try to type them in laboriously later. I've totally seen people doing that. I'm like, no, don't do that. But this blog post I thought was really interesting because it talked about the process of how the US government realized that they needed a platform to deliver better digital services. And they did not want every individual department reinventing all of their deployment and logging and monitoring and scaling and all of those processes. Right? I'm in Canada, I should say processes, right? Okay, all of those processes that are, I'm not doing it right, am I? They say the Minnesota no is close, but I'm like, no, it's Minnesota, but no, it's not that close. But yeah, you don't want people to repeat the same undifferentiated heavy lifting. And so they decided that if they're going to be building and launching these ships constantly, it made so much more sense to just have a standard way to do it. And then everybody, I talked to so many people, and this image is from Simon Wardley, who's a really interesting character from the UK, who tweets about a lot of stuff in this space about containers, platforms. And he likes to point out that like a container is not a platform. And so if people know they need a platform and they say, okay, well, we're gonna get some Docker. And I'm like, well, that sounds good. And Docker has some brand new tooling that they've just announced that's like in beta that you can use to build a platform. Or there's a lot of other choices. There's a lot of open source choices out there, you know, from the fine folks at Red Hat and other people, or even Pivotal. But I kind of feel like there's a lot of confusion around what a platform is. So I think that we're just gonna talk a little bit about what a platform is, and then we're gonna show a little bit of how you can construct this stuff. And so like, when you're talking about a container, like that is super useful, right? Because you do want to actually take your application and all of its dependencies and not worry about whether or not you have the right dependencies when you're trying to ship some code. And then when you're troubleshooting stuff, it's really nice to be able to pull that container that's running in production, put it in your test bed, and throw stuff at it, make some tweaks, and see exactly how it goes. This does not mean, by the way, that you should have like a dev write a Docker file and then like Docker build and Docker push or whatever and start Docker running that stuff and just like YOLO it out into production. That's actually a terrible idea, because you can write anything you want in a Docker file, including things like add the contents of my current working directory. Good luck replicating that. Who knows what was on their laptop? Or you can just tell it to apt-get a bunch of packages with no versions. It's like, so the moment in time that you did that, it became obsolete. So it's like, well, you can construct an image from a Docker file itself is not going to be enough to actually know what that image actually is going to have in it. So this is a whole digression. I have so many rants about this, but suffice to say that if you don't control the provenance of your images themselves, then you don't have a safe way to deliver those images into your platform. And I got news for you, like you have a platform. Even if you're thinking, oh, we don't use PaaS, well, that's cool. I mean, you don't have to be using something that's as a service. I feel like, by the way, do you have those Easter eggs that are like PaaS in Canada? Do you have those? Like PAAS to me sounds like Easter egg dice. I'm like, that's a terrible word. But for, since you have some way that you're deploying and scaling and monitoring and logging, hopefully, your applications that you run in production, like you have some kind of platform. I mean, even if you assembled it, like even if you have a bespoke artisanal platform you hand whittled out of like I've totally done in the past, out of a bunch of fabs, a bunch of fabric scripts, because Python, this one step of a SSH and a for loop is totally a thing, right? And so like out of a bunch of fabric scripts and maybe some stuff that going through Jenkins and some Docker and some Packer and some Chef and some janky bash, because anyone who tells you there's no janky bash in their hand-rolled platform is totally lying. Like there's janky bash at the bottom of all of that. But when you're considering all of these pieces, like I added those red arrows because I sort of disagree about exactly where Simon Wardley is drawing the line as to what is in the platform. Like I consider the part where you're provisioning and orchestrating your applications to be something that your platform should do. But regardless, I think it should be pretty clear that a container itself is only one piece of the platform. This is an image that shows, and I don't know how visible this one's going to be here. It's like there's some issues with the way this shows up. Sorry about that. But this shows some of the stuff, and you can look at the slides later. Like I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this, but some of the components that at Pivotal we think should be in a platform, and so the open source Cloud Foundry that we build does get them. It's stuff like your platform should talk to your infrastructure in some sort of automated way. Let's assume that your infrastructure does provide some sort of hooks for you to provision storage or create VMs or something like that. And you should have some way to do centralized logging, and you should have some way to actually deploy code, scale, route traffic inside it. And there's a lot of things that we think platforms should do that it's a lot of pieces. This is like my cautionary tale is if you start to build this from scratch, you should at least go and look at some of the prior art out there. Even if something like Cloud Foundry is too heavyweight for you, go look at what Yelp just open sourced. They open sourced something called Pasta. It's like ha ha ha. Food recommendations and paths. And they open source something called PASDA that they hand whittled out of a whole bunch of really, industry standard-ish tools. And so like, looking at what other people have built will at least give you some insight if you decide to build something, which is going to be a long path. And then we get into a discussion about structure in platforms, about opinionated versus unopinionated. I like this picture. It's kind of a joke. I did have Andrew Schaefer. I worked with him at Pivotal, and had him on Arrested DevOps just last week, speaking with Kelsey Hightower, Mr. Kubernetes himself. And Schaefer, if you don't know him, little idea on Twitter, very interesting fellow. He did admit that he mostly posted this infographic to troll Kelsey Hightower. But what he's talking about here is that it depends on what your goals are. So if your goal is to build something, and that is how you're going to differentiate your efforts, then, and you have the bandsaws and everything you need and a bunch of 2x4s, by all means build a treehouse. If your goal is to have a treehouse and then go from there, and then hopefully your kids will have all sorts of fun, or you'll have all sorts of fun, or whatever, then starting from the raw materials is going to take you a lot longer, and is it going to make it any better? No one can answer that question for you, but when you're trying to decide what differentiates your organization and how you add value, then if a differentiating factor for you is your innovative infrastructure and how you constructed it, and that's going to make you more money or bring you more attention or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, by all means, go for it. Just bear in mind that if you pick something that has more of those opinions baked in, and maybe you get to pick which ladder or whatever, it may save you a lot of time and effort. So that's kind of looking at a lot of the platforms out there. There is a link, and I may have not left it in this particular version of the slide deck, but Brian Gracely from Wikibon has a very good series of articles from earlier this year about structured and unstructured platforms. So you could just take a look at, structured and unstructured platforms, Wikibon, and read some of that. It helps you, I think it helps lend some clarity to making these decisions. If you're thinking at this point, like, I don't actually want to build a platform, I actually want to try running on one. Run.pivotal.io has a 60-day free trial, no credit card. Like, we don't actually care if you buy anything again, but you can at least try the kind of Heroku-like experience of doing the CF push. Just so that if you want to try Cloud Foundry kind of from more of the developer point of view, instead of trying it from the platform, like administrator point of view, you can try it on Pivotal Web Services. But again, like, just kind of going back to if you are sourcing a platform, and a lot of people are making platform-related decisions, even if it means improving the platform that they already have, try to make sure you have covered at least what my coworker Casey West put these into an article he did for O'Reilly about like the cloud-native future. And if you do want to write cloud-native apps and have them be functional on your platform, at the very minimum, there's going to need to be some sort of load balancing, whether you're leveraging tools from AWS or whatever other IaaS of your choice. But you have to use some sort of load balancing and routing of traffic inside your platform. Whether you have like some sort of service discovery or something else, you do not want to have files that you have to update with like where this application can be found. I mean, even if you just use DNS, it's not perfect, but it's at least something. But you have to have something like that to route traffic. You have to have a way to add backing services, and I will show you like just adding a simple Redis service to a local Cloud Foundry installation. But in general, you don't want people to make very un-12-factor-ish decisions because it's easier. If someone says, I know we're not supposed to share backing data stores, but getting another one, or session stores or whatever, but getting another one spun up is like another ticket and another VM, and there's chargeback implications, and it's going to be so much work. I'll just write this application to use the same one as this other one that already exists. And I see some people nodding, and you've probably lived this story, and you know where that story ends. Like, it ends in sadness, and in somebody being really upset about the schema migration that didn't take their application into account. It's like, we just talked about this, right? We just talked about the importance of actually managing these changes with your database, and this becomes really difficult if you're setting up your microservices to, use the same backend data store because it was easier. So like, it should be easy for people to do the right thing. Like, in terms of being a platform administrator, you want to make the choice you want people to make the easy choice. People will choose the easy button. It's like if you make it possible for them to choose that with less pain. In terms of infrastructure, I mean, that one's kind of a no-brainer. So if your infrastructure automation, if your infrastructure provisioning involves a human step in any capacity, if you have to open a ticket, or maybe you fill out a form and that automatically opens a ticket for you, and that's how you get a VM, like, that's not gonna fly, right? Because you know how much that slows you down. So that's one of those places where a lot of the improvements people end up making are just things like, let's get our OpenStack or our vSphere or whatever it is we're using in our data center. Maybe we're casting a longing eye on, Azure or whatever, and we're not there yet. But let's get at least more automation with the stuff we actually already have. So that improves your platform immeasurably. That health management, monitoring, and recovering, the main thing I would say about that is, and this came up in a discussion that I was having with some customers recently about microservice design. And they said, well, how do you know how micro a microservice should be? Or how do you know when you're decomposing your monolith when to stop? And I said, well, I mean, one thing I know that we've done wrong at a place I've worked before is we set up a microservice that we thought was right, and then all the instances kept getting kicked out of the load balancer because they were failing the health check. Well, they were failing the health check, but a lot of stuff was still working. They didn't need to fail the health check. It's just that this health check was trying to cover several different components that we put into the same service, and we were running on the same instances. And so it's like, okay, if your health checks are full of deceit and lies, you're probably doing microservices wrong. And you're probably not writing them to be full of deceit and lies, but again, like, if you can't answer the question, is this actually healthy, yes or no, with a yes or no answer, if it's a nuanced, it depends, this part is, okay, your service is too large. It's like, break that up. And obviously, if you can have auto remediation, then people like me spend a lot less time being awake in the middle of the night. It's like, how many people here actually are or have been on call for anything? It's like, all right, about a third of the room. So look to your left, look to your right. Those are your friends and neighbors. Don't wake them up in the night. The idea of, I think number 5 is like the most confusing sounding one. So I'll just make it really simple. Something like a Docker registry, where something like your artifact store, something where when you have your version deployable, infrastructure, your version deployable software, you can put it somewhere and find it next time you're looking for it. That's all. It's like, if you don't have that is easily accessible to your platform, you're going to want that, because it's going to make your life so much better. And then the idea of aggregated logs. Like, if you've worked at ops and you've ever done, keyboard as a service, where you've been SSHing in to look at the logs or go get the logs for the developer who's trying to troubleshoot something, like, nobody has time for that, right? So like, getting the logs to a centralized place that the devs can get them for anything they need, super useful and important. So, yeah, so we'll do a tiny bit of demo stuff. I feel like watching people type is slow and boring, so we're not going to spend a ton of time watching me type. But fortunately, since I did this before with my coworker Casey, and he actually made a GitHub repo that has all the stuff in it, and this link will be in the, I have to stop saying show notes. But this link will be available to you, but it's just github.com/cwest/cfenv. This has everything that you need to actually try this at home. Please try this at home. The first thing that I'm just gonna kind of give you a tour of a couple of things in this repo, because I probably need to submit another pull request that actually says more in the README, because you know how these things go. You write the README first, everything evolves over time. There's great stuff in here that's not actually mentioned in there. So this first thing that's kind of interesting is Casey spent a bunch of time, and a bunch of us on the team actually spent a bunch of time testing this, to do the install Cloud Foundry locally with Bosch Lite, which is, again, the infrastructure automation tool, but your laptop is probably not a fully formed IaaS, so you probably don't need everything in full-featured Bosch. But install Cloud Foundry locally, and then the open source Cloud Foundry, then add the Diego, which is the container runtime, because open source Cloud Foundry, as of when we started working on this in early December, did not have it by default turned on. I think, and maybe somebody in this room even knows, they are actually either about to ship or have shipped, it with that working, but I'm not going to promise that. This is what I've tested. installing all the tools that you need, and then getting it so that you can actually try everything that I'm going to show you here yourself at home. Like if you run this script and it's idempotent, if it fails, there are a lot of weird failure conditions that this is not a perfect script by any means. We just fail out if something goes wrong, but go ahead and try it at least. And it did work for me. Ooh, do I get to be like a developer and say it works on my machine? I think I did. It works on my machine. I will caution you that you do need between 8 and 10 gig. I actually was using 10. I see that he updated it to 8. That may be slightly optimistic. Gig of RAM free. So unfortunately, your MacBook Air is great for travel. I am using my sadly stickerless 16 gig MacBook Pro because yeah, I can't actually run this on my Air. Okay, so other stuff to look at here. We do have a Docker file. Ooh, Docker file. Let's see, Casey built this from Alpine Linux. We had a thread on when we talked about this in, I think it was New York, because I was like, why didn't you just use from scratch? Oh wait, you're writing Ruby. Okay, so yes, if you say you want to run like a super minimal Docker binary, if you have a statically linked Go binary and you're not super attached to, I don't know, libc, like whatever, if you can have a really statically linked binary that's small and you can start from scratch and just add that, yes, you can make super small Docker files, Docker images. That's not what we're gonna do here. So this one starts from Alpine Linux, adds a bunch of Ruby stuff, and then just adds this little teeny bit of Ruby code that is available in this repo, just so that we can have something that runs. And all it's going to do is run and tell us, which instance it is, because this is, I think Casey, or I think Kenny actually on our team likes to call it, hello world, like as a service. It's like, yeah, massively scalable hello world applications. Like this isn't about that code. The other thing that is sort of interest here is, and that the Docker file did build into something that is actually on Docker Hub. So we are going to use public Docker Hub for this. And then the other thing that's probably interesting here is this is actually everything that I'm going to do. And we don't even have to do all of it. I'm just going to show you a little of it in action. But if you want to actually try this at home, it's like everything that we're going to do is right here. Okay, what I have already done, and I'm going to show you what I have here already. What I have already done is run that script so that I actually have Cloud Foundry installed. I'll show you, is that big enough for people to see is the question? Or does it need to be bigger? Bigger? How is that? Does it need to be bigger? I could. I'm increasing the size of the font, so I can do that. But there's other stuff that I, kind of want to show you, so bigger. Okay, so this is actually the Bosch Lite virtual machines that are running here, and you start to see why this takes so much RAM. Spoiler alert, there will be a little bit of Redis later. Speaking of which, if anybody saw like I think was it a sad server tweet that was like, oh wait, so you store all your you store all your data in Redis and now it's gone and somehow like I'm the asshole? And it's like, yeah, that was the kind of my opinion of Redis. It's like Redis is great, just don't store everything in there forever and hope it'll stay. Okay, so the warden, we should probably talk about that a little bit. So if you're thinking like, wait a minute, Cloud Foundry has this warden thing. Like, they don't do Docker, they do this warden thing. Well, yes and no. So Cloud Foundry has been using containers for a long time. But when they added the Docker support with the Diego runtime, so we have these like VMs that run that, and then they are actually in active development to make instead of using our own container format, use the OCI compliant, like run the Docker image completely natively. Like that's an active development. So right now it basically takes the Docker image, deconstructs it, rebuilds it so that it runs as Warden, but that's not how it's going to be going forward. So okay. So anyway, let's just go back. So let's talk about. Okay, sorry. Like as soon as I maximize it, it's like everything is not behaving the way I expect it to. Let's we don't have any Cloud Foundry apps running right now. We're gonna do, let's see, I don't wanna be in this workspace. I think I actually wanna be, see, I appreciate your maximize this, but the problem with that is then I don't have all of the other windows that I wanted to show you some stuff from, so. Let's go to this one. So, where did I actually, yeah, I just put this in a GitHub directory. This CFENV stuff this is the exact stuff that you just saw on GitHub. So if we do a CF push directly from this, it'll use the build pack model. And you're thinking at this point, if you're me at least, you're thinking, wait, you're just gonna let that pick whatever build pack it wants? And it's like, yeah, from an ops person perspective, of course, you would probably choose the exact version of whatever build pack you wanted. Also make sure that your installation of Cloud Foundry has the build packs that you find applicable to your needs. It usually, like for example, it auto detects that this is Ruby, sees a gem file, kind of a giveaway. And then it does, all of the go and grab and install and whatnot. So we're gonna just take a look with CF apps and we'll see this, become available in a minute. See, so it started it. It doesn't actually have any instances of it running yet. Defaults of, how much memory, how much disk you wanna set. Again, this is all configurable. These are defaults that we set up in the Bosch manifest. If you're gonna use open source Cloud Foundry, you're gonna get used to Bosch and you're gonna, what were the folks here calling it? Enterprise YAML engineer or something. Like, just get used to really long YAML files, because that's just how it goes. Anyway, so it will bring it up in just a moment. Another thing that I think is sort of useful to think about here is you're like, okay, so this is doing a build pack, and it's going to what? Oh, and I'll just show you. Where did the window go? Okay. So this one, the CFENV, it now is up. So it's like one instance of it running, right? So you're like, okay, that's cool, but we came here to see some Docker, so let's see the same application, but with the Docker build. All right, sure, no problem. So we have, again, we've done a CF push, and literally the build pack just shows us, all right, you have an application that you've pushed to Cloud Foundry. If we wanted to do it with Docker, let's just kind of deconstruct what's in this command. This is not using stuff from the current working directory, right? This is actually using a flag for Docker image, then this is actually from the public Docker hub, including the tag. It's like, okay, we're gonna go with the master one. And we have to give it a name. Right now you're thinking, oh, well, wait a minute, you didn't give the other one a name. No, it picked a default name, based on the code, based on the project. This one, I don't wanna give it the same name, and I wanna call it CFN Docker, so I'm gonna give it a name. This one, it needs to do a Docker pull. So this, even though it doesn't tell you, it doesn't show you the ... when you're trying to Docker pull on slow Wi-Fi, which this is not, thankfully. But it doesn't show you that, but it is doing the Docker pull that you would expect, but behind the scenes. This will, of course, then you're thinking, oh, so you had to, if you've been paying attention to the Docker ecosystem, you're thinking, wait a minute, back in October, they had those CVEs, and they decided to deprecate the earlier versions of, the old version of the registry and earlier versions of Docker Engine. It's like, yes, they did. They did that with very short notice, but our engineers were on the job and very quick, and managed to get, with like the very next point release, managed to get the changes that would allow us to continue to do that Docker pull. Again, from, continue to do the Docker pull from public Docker Hub. And so then you're thinking, all right, why are you showing me public Docker Hub? Because this all seems very exciting, and I'm gonna start using it at my, ginormous insurance agency or bank or whatever. But we can't use public Docker Hub. Well, of course not. The support for private registries is coming in PCF 1.7. So that there is stuff probably in head right now. There's stuff out there that's being worked on for it. Again, code under active development, large open source project. So you can go and look at it under development right now.
But that's only with Cloud Foundry, right? Well, private Docker hubs are fully supported right now.
Yeah. I'm talking about using it with Cloud Foundry, absolutely. Good point, thank you. Let me back up a minute. If you wanted to use a private registry, even last year, that's not a problem at all. You will recall that Docker recently came out with their private registry, but even before they had those, it was completely possible. Actually, at my last gig at Drama Fever, the streaming video site, it was kind of like Netflix if Netflix were much smaller and mostly Korean soap opera and ran Docker in production. So maybe not so much like Netflix. What we were doing was we actually, and this is a pattern that I've seen a couple of more people adopt since then, but it's sort of interesting, is we were running our own registry, and when we started up the registry container and pointed out, all of our instances at it, it seemed fine at first, and then we had a traffic spike, and we had 20 instances auto scale up and try to do all their Docker pulls at the same time, and our registry fell over. And so we could have tried to build a really fault-tolerant, scalable registry like central service. And what we ended up going with instead was completely distributing it and going with a host local registry. Because the registry container is just another container. And so you can run the registry on all of your infrastructure and even your laptop. And then just set because it is DNS reliant, so set your DNS appropriately so that the registry you're trying to use always resolves to 127.0.0.1. You do have to override that on your Macs because after, I see you're nodding, it's like you've done this, After it was Docker 1.3, they changed the way the host local registry works. So you do need to, use an IP address that's specified on your Mac, like a local IP address, not localhost. The typical, there's no place like home, 127.0.0.1. So many digressions aside. But anyway, so this is actually running here now. But, so back to your point. You have been able to use private registries for quite a while. Private registries with SSL is a whole different matter, also possible for some time now. The way that Docker does the OAuth 2 stuff is a little bit weird. And so the way we're implementing it in Cloud Foundry, we're taking a little bit of time to make sure it's exactly the way we want it to be. But that's available real soon now in TM. So let's take a look at our CF apps at this point. So now we have both of these apps running here on the platform, one with Docker and one without. So let's take a look at if we want to go to the URL, send some traffic to it. Move this around. Let's go to the Docker one. This is what it looks like, by the way. I made sure to check it when it wasn't up so you can kind of see. It has no route to this because it's not resolving because I have nothing up. And when it is up, then we've got this instance. Let's give it some more instances. In real life, and you're thinking like, okay, I'm gonna type CF scale, and you're thinking, in real life, there's no way that you would be CF scaling anything because you would have your automation do this. Well, of course. So the auto scaling in Cloud Foundry is you can react to the typical load memory, whatever that you would do like your AWS auto scaling or any other auto scaling with. So let's give the Docker one some more instances because why not? And we've told it to start these instances. Let's see if we can get some traffic going to one of the other instances instead of, oh, there we got instance 4 and instance 2. It's like highly scalable hello world app, very exciting. But point being, it's like it was very easy to just request more instances of the same application. Let's see, what else should we look at? Oh, let's talk about if we wanted to make this enterprise grade. Everybody knows that when people say, and this is kind of more me picking on 12-factor, and I like 12-factor, I do. I think that 12-factor apps makes a lot of sense. I think that that handshake of 12-factor ops, where you make sure that you actually have, if somebody is logging in a certain way, great. That means that from the operational point of view, they were expecting their logs to be treated and handled and made available to them in a certain way. So you can't really have 12-factor apps without completing that contract with operational support for all the things that developers are trying to do. And again, like if you construct your platform well, it can be a decent boundary object to allow that. Let's see, let's just add a service. Let's add Redis. Cloud Foundry has this concept of the marketplace, and in this MVP script, we did the thing. You can look in there and see what it is. It's kind of boring, but we did the thing that installs this particular Redis that I want to make available in this marketplace. So we have this Redis. We can add some Redis. Why not? We're going to create a Redis service. And you can pick if you want it to be shared or dedicated. That's an example of, and again, like, you're thinking a structured platform doesn't have a lot of configurable stuff in it, but it kind of does. Like, there's things that you as a platform administrator, or you can just leave up to your developers, like, you know, in terms of what to do. All right, so we've got this. We're going to bind, this one, and we're not gonna do exactly what's in the example here, because I want to bind it to the Docker one. I mean, that's the one where I have all sorts of instances, right? Keep in mind, you can actually do a bind, and you can do a restage, but we're just going to push this again so that we have this change. You can bind, we could bind both of our applications. We could bind our build pack version and our Dockerized application to the same session store, for example. I would recommend we don't do that. Maybe in test we could do that, but this is kind of one of those, just because you can doesn't mean you should. The platform is not going to tie your hands. It will let you do that, but that's probably a terrible idea, right? Unless, again, your use case, maybe you have a reason for two different applications to write to the same session store. Yes?
I think I'm past the point of embarrassment with this question, but
Okay.
I can't quite follow, well, everything, but.
Oh,
I can't
sorry.
That's okay. I can't quite follow the distinction, the benefit between the deployment that you did.
I can't follow the distinction between the deployment that you did first versus the deployment that you did with Docker.
Oh,
What
thank you
did
for
you
asking.
gain from that?
Absolutely, that's a really good question, actually, and I should have covered it. Thank you for asking that.
That's good because I thought I felt ignorant.
No, you're right, and I rushed over that, and I mentioned build packs and I mentioned Docker images. I'm not showing any .NET here. Sorry, I'm like completely Windows impaired. So if you're doing .NET, there will be other amazing people out there, I'm sure, who can answer those questions. But if you're using a build pack, you may have noticed that I had the code checked out, and I just typed cf push, and everything that was there on my laptop checked out, and that current working directory is what went. And that's a really good way to do it if you only want the developers to just give you code. The whole, take my code, run it in the cloud, I don't care how. There's like a haiku about that. So if that's how you and your organization want the developers to operate and deliver code into the platform, then a build pack is a good way to do that, because they're not making decisions like, I'm going to use from Ubuntu 14.04, or I'm going to use Alpine, or whatever, in their Docker file. So let's look back at that Docker file super quick, because there's a lot of decisions that have been made in this Docker file that are being brought along with that application, right? So, for example, choosing a stripped down version of Linux, choosing to add some software, choosing to add specific versions of Ruby. If you're using a build pack, you might make decisions like people can only use this specific Java. We don't want them bringing their super old crafty Java, like we're only gonna let them use Java 8 or whatever. So it's a question of scope. It's a question of like, you know, choosing whether for a specific project. And just because we have build packs and Docker images doesn't mean that we have to choose only one or another and allow them to be used. Let me just finish this thought and then I wanna hear that question. It means that inside your organization, you can make the choices as to whether for a specific project it makes more sense to have the developers just deliver some code and not make any decisions like this around how the code is going to operate and be run. Or if you want the people who are developing the code to give you all of this stuff around the code. And that's not a question I can answer for you. That's a question that you have to answer inside your organization. But since you can use build packs or Docker images, you have that choice. Does that clear up the reason why you would allow both and why they're different?
Yeah, I'd need to actually work with it for a bit, but yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for asking. We have another question over here.
No?
Yes.
No, perfect. So I guess my question has sort of been answered because my
Yes.
question was, okay, I know in the second example it's running in a Docker container, but in the first example, what is it running in? And I think you just said a build pack, which I don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting.
Okay, sure, absolutely. We can talk about that a little bit. So build packs were popularized by Heroku, and the idea is to give you that environment that you need to run the code. This is a very high-level explanation because I honestly do not know a ton about build packs. I can talk about Docker all day, don't know a ton about build packs. But as I understand it, in both cases, the code is running inside the Cloud Foundry virtual machines that I have running with VirtualBox on my machine. So in both cases, it's running in the platform. In the build packs case, the build pack is providing the runtime environment that the code needs, all the configuration that the code needs, that the software needs in order to run. Whereas in the Docker example, the Docker image is providing all of the context in which the code is operating. Does that make any sense?
So I've always had Docker explained to me as like VMs, but way pared down. And so a build pack is an even more pared down thing.
So I'm getting the opinion that if Docker is like VMs pared down, then the build pack is even more pared down. I mean, maybe. I would put it as that Docker is not a lightweight virtual machine. People sometimes think of it that way, but I think it's a running Docker container is not what I would consider to be a lightweight virtual machine because it's running processes on your local machine or on your host with C groups, namespaces, because again, I'm on a Mac here, but I'm running in a virtual Linux machine, so I can even use Docker. Docker is actually working on, and I believe are going to soon have user namespaces, which just means that you're not going to spend so much time worrying about exactly which user the stuff you're running as Docker can run as, what it can get access to. When you have a hypervisor, you need to use an exploit in the hypervisor, generally speaking, to break out of the VM and run rampant on your underlying host. Whereas with Docker, like you can literally have a running container and then just out on the host use CP to take things in and out of the file system of the running container. I've totally done this. When you know you need something that is not actually built into the image you need to use. And this is before they had, like any of the enter or any of the commands to actually do that. It's like, it's just a file system. You can drop things on it all day long. Yes?
Actually, so my question might be a little bit foolish based upon the level of infrastructure that is happening. So I want to ask, this Cloud Foundry and your Docker is running. This Cloud Foundry, is it sometimes some sort of Linux environment because it has to be floating somewhere in some operating system?
Absolutely. The question was, what exactly is Cloud Foundry? Is it running on Linux or what is it? And very good question. As you saw when I typed Bosch VMs, we did launch a bunch of VMs, and we can take a look at those again. And those are running on VirtualBox. So they're running on fake Linux on my Mac here, layers within layers within layers. And see where it says availability zone, not applicable. I mean, that would be applicable if we were in Amazon. And then like type, it can, it can correspond to like, if you wanted to, if you set this up in AWS, I think a standard Cloud Foundry installation in AWS takes like, I don't know, 19 instances or something. It's something like 19, isn't it? So again, we're kind of modeling that here. But yes, Cloud Foundry does use Ubuntu. One nice thing about running Docker images on the platform is say you have some sort of application that's vendor developed and only runs on Red Hat Linux. RHEL, it has to be RHEL. All right, that's cool. Just bring your Docker file with RHEL and run it. I don't know if that explains it, but yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see, what were we gonna, we were talking about Redis. So like, I don't need to walk through or show you all this. I feel like that could feel sort of tedious. So I mostly just want to show you one other thing from this because it's a little bit interesting. Like a lot of stuff you can look at on your own, but the CF log stuff is sort of interesting. So we talked before about log aggregation, and you care about that, right? You care about that a lot, right? If you're running something in production, like you really want to see all the logs from all of your instances. Here we are, since we added the enterprise features, right? We have our enterprise grade application. We now have a session store. We're counting visits. We're counting the visits across whichever instances. So like, we don't care which instance we're on. We just like that, we have Redis, we have a session store. And I'm looking, to demoing, you end up with sad demo fail if you copy pasted the wrong thing, right? You saw that I decided that I didn't want to look at the logs for CFENV, which is running, by the way. We can look at the logs for it, but it doesn't actually have anything really interesting going on with it. Let's take a look at the logs for CFENV Docker, because that's the one that actually has stuff we care about. Let's give a little traffic to it. It has some exciting error. It looks like an error. I mean, it says error. I don't know. It's not really an error, but anyways, you can see that like you can just look at all of and it has all the stuff you'd expect if you're pouring this into Splunk or Elk or whatever it is you're sending it into. Cloud Foundry has this thing. Again, these are all open source projects. So the logregator, it's like naming things. It's one of the hard problems, right? Like in computer science, it's naming things and cache and validation and choosing platforms are the two hard problems. And counting is like, you know, we're computer scientists. We're computer scientists. We're allowed to be off by one. So if we have no traffic, then we just have health checks. The health checks are deciding whether or not these instances are healthy. There's a bunch more stuff we can do, but it's already 8:26. I don't even know how that happened. But I'm pretty sure I've been talking at you for an hour, and I'm sorry. So wait, Canada, sorry. I'm sorry. So basically, like, there's a bunch of stuff we can do with like killing the VMs and then resurrect and a whole bunch of stuff like that. Maybe we can talk about that later over drinks or whatever. But mostly, I kind of wanted to show you. We can go back to the slides now. But I basically just wanted to show you that like I think sometimes when you're trying to choose this stuff, like you want to kick the tires, and that's one of the things that I think Docker has done a really good job of. For example, is Schaefer likes to put it as their mean time to dopamine is really low. You're like, hey, I've gotten something working really fast, and that's exciting. And I feel like that one of the things that makes Cloud Foundry hard to get people talking about and excited about and build community around is that our mean time to dopamine is higher and harder, which is why the stuff in this GitHub repo at least should make it a little more accessible and faster to try it. So you too can say, oh, well, I was using containers on this completely different platform, you know, it's like bragging rights or whatever. So there's some further reading here, and again, you don't have to write these all down or take a picture and type it in. You know, these slides will be posted on meetup.com like shortly after this. But just point a couple of things out about them. CloudFoundry.org is run by the foundation, so that's the open source stuff. Bosch.io, like Bosch is the part that I actually find the most interesting. That's the infrastructure automation tool. It's IaaS agnostic, so it works across you know, Azure, AWS, working on it with Google, like OpenStack, vSphere, whatever it is that you want to talk to. Somebody has written a CPI or like cloud provider interface for it. And I mean, we have like Microsoft is writing the CPI for Azure. So like, and they're contributing that open source code. So like, this is I think that's a good sign. Like if you can get Microsoft to write the part that talks to Azure for you, you know it's probably going to be right. So, and again, we have AWS people writing the CPI for, you know, with Pivotal people writing the stuff for AWS. But so Bosch is pretty cool. It's got like 1,000, you know, like 1,000-mile high learning curve, which is just ridiculous. And I'm just learning it myself. But conference-driven development, totally a thing. I'm giving a, you know, managing infrastructure, managing distributed systems with Bosch, I think is what I called it. Tutorial at OSCON in May, so I have to learn it now. You can come to Texas and learn it with me. It'll be fun. Pivotal.io/platform is talking about the commercial version, but I think it has some really good explanations of what you want in a platform. Run.pivotal.io, you can try the hosted one for free. This cloud native article that my coworker Casey West wrote for O'Reilly is the one that I got that list of the minimum viable platform ideas, but there's a lot of other good stuff in there. So if you're trying to develop cloud native apps, there's some good ideas in there. That 18F article, the blog post of theirs where they were talking about the cloud.gov launch and the stuff that they learned from that and the questions people asked them. And the GitHub repo that has all this stuff so you can actually try it. That's all. Thank you all so much for listening to an entire hour. And I'm sorry, Steve, because I know I told you I'd only talk for half an hour. That might have been a lie, accidentally on purpose.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, sorry, not sorry. But I really, really like talking about this stuff, obviously. So if people have questions, comments, ideas, I think we've taken some questions throughout, and I don't want to take up any more time of everyone's. So I will take your questions, you know, serially after this. But Thank you all very much. Yay, Toronto. Hey. Oh, and if you're wondering what that ship is, it's the Vasa. You should totally go watch Pete Cheslock's talk about 17th century shipbuilding and your failed software project. It's 5 minutes long, it's hilarious, and it's probably fun. Right?
Yeah, seriously, that's a great talk. I'll post a link in the show notes.
Show notes. Now you're show notesing.
Show notes. Oh yeah, do you have announcements about